April 3rd, 2026, the strategic architecture of the 5-week-old conflict between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran underwent a seismic shift. A U.S. fighter jet, identified by defense insiders as an F-35C Lightning II operating from the USS Abraham Lincoln, was downed over the rugged terrain of Iran's Kohgiluyeh and Boyer-Ahmad province. This incident marks the first confirmed loss of a manned American fixed-wing aircraft since the commencement of hostilities on February 28, 2026. The confirmation came via a high-ranking U.S. official speaking to Reuters on the condition of anonymity, stating simply, "A U.S. fighter jet was shot down over Iran, and a search and rescue operation was underway for any survivors." While the Pentagon and U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, have maintained a disciplined silence in the hours following the report, the ground reality in Iran is one of frenzied mobilization. The downed aircraft was reportedly engaged in a suppression of enemy air defenses, CAD, mission targeting mobile missile batteries in the Zagros Mountains when contact was lost. The location of the crash, the Kohgiluyeh and Boyer-Ahmad province, is geographically significant and tactically treacherous. Characterized by the jagged peaks of the Zagros Range, the region offers significant concealment for downed air crews, but presents a nightmare for combat search and rescue, CSAR, teams. The province's governor, speaking through the semi-official Iranian news agency ISNA, took the unprecedented step of incentivizing the local populace to interfere with recovery efforts. He declared that whomever captured or killed the crew would be specially commended, a statement that effectively places a state-sanctioned bounty on American service members. The tactical sequence, reconstructed from regional signals intelligence and satellite imagery, suggests the aircraft was engaged by a long-range surface-to-air missile, SAM system, likely the indigenous Bavar 373 or an upgraded Khordad 15 battery. These systems have been the primary focus of U.S. kinetic strikes since February. Yet this incident proves that the Iranian Integrated Air Defense System, IADS, remains partially functional despite 34 days of sustained bombardment. The search and rescue operation currently underway is a high-stakes race against time and geography. Sources indicate that a joint force of Navy SEALs and Air Force Pararescuemen, PJs, supported by MH-60M Blackhawks and AH-64E Apaches, has been deployed from forward operating bases in northern Iraq. However, the window of opportunity, the golden hour of recovery, is closing rapidly. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC units, specifically the Sabaran Special Forces Brigade, are reported to be moving into the suspected crash zone near the city of Yasuj. The political stakes cannot be overstated. Since the war began on February 28th, the American public has been insulated from the visceral reality of boots on the ground, or pilots in cages. The prospect of a U.S. pilot being paraded through the streets of Tehran, or worse, being utilized as human shields near high-value targets, fundamentally alters the domestic appetite for the conflict. The IRGC-affiliated media outlets have already begun broadcasting images of charred wreckage, though they have yet to provide definitive proof of the crew's status. The governor's call for civilians to join the hunt signals a transition from conventional warfare to a people's defense model. By involving the local population in the capture or liquidation of air crews, Tehran is attempting to create a Black Hawk Down scenario within the Iranian interior. This move is designed to force the U.S. into a moral and tactical dilemma, whether to use lethal force against civilian search parties to protect their own or risk the loss of their personnel to a hostile mob. In Washington, the silence from the White House is deafening. Behind the curtain, the National Security Council is reportedly debating whether to escalate the ROE, rules of engagement, to allow for preemptive strikes on any moving vehicle in the vicinity of the crash site. Such a move would be a massive escalation, potentially resulting in high civilian casualties and providing Iran with a major propaganda victory on the international stage. The clock is ticking. The terrain is unforgiving. The enemy is incentivized. The hunt is no longer just for a pilot, it is for the soul of the mission. The downing of a manned U.S. aircraft over Iranian soil is not merely a tactical setback, it is a structural fracture in the myth of American air omnipotence. From a realist perspective, we must look beyond the immediate search and rescue drama to the cold calculus of power dynamics that this event precipitates. This is a moment of leverage realignment. The primary concern for the United States is the transition of this conflict from a kinetic air and sea war to a hostage crisis war. In the realist framework, an American pilot in Iranian custody is a strategic asset for Tehran that outweighs a dozen missile batteries. A captive pilot provides the IRGC with a human brake on U.S. escalation. If the pilot is held at a critical nuclear site, such as Natanz or Fordow, the U.S. is effectively paralyzed. Iran understands the American psyche. They know that the U.S. political leadership is hypersensitive to the optics of captured service members. By offering special commendations for the capture or death of the crew, the Iranian leadership is maximizing the asymmetric value of a single human being. They are transforming a technical military loss into a psychological siege. Behind the curtain, the most chilling aspect for the Pentagon is the technical data Iran, and by extension, Russia and China, may gain from the wreckage. If the aircraft is indeed an F-35C, the recovery of its radar-absorbent material, RAM, and its sensor suite would be the intelligence coup of the decade. We must assume that Russian technical advisors are already en route to the crash site. The downing proves that even the most advanced stealth platforms are vulnerable to a redundant, multi-layered IADS when the defender is fighting with their back to the wall. This shatters the invincibility narrative that has underpinned U.S. arms sales and security guarantees across the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific. If an F-35 can be brought down by a Bavar 373, the strategic cost-benefit analysis for countries like Taiwan or Japan begins to shift. The regional observers, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel, are watching this with predatory focus. For the Abraham Accords partners, the U.S. ability to dominate Iranian airspace was the primary collateral for their security. A successful Iranian strike against a U.S. jet signals that Tehran's strategic depth is more than just rhetoric. Conversely, this will embolden the axis of resistance. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and various Iraqi militias will view this as a sign of American overextension. In the realist view, power is as much about the perception of strength as it is about actual capability. When a superpower's blood is drawn, the sharks of the international system begin to circle. We can expect an immediate uptick in harassing fire against U.S. assets in the Red Sea and Eastern Mediterranean as proxies test the limits of a distracted Washington. For the Biden administration, or its 2026 successor, this incident creates a sunk cost trap. To abandon the search or to fail in the rescue is politically fatal. However, to launch a massive, high-risk CSR operation into the heart of the Zagros Mountains risks losing even more assets and personnel. The Iranian governor's call for civilian participation is a masterstroke of Machiavellian realism. It forces the U.S. to choose between failure and atrocity. If U.S. rescue teams fire upon Iranian civilians who are attempting to capture the pilot, the global narrative shifts from U.S. defending interests to U.S. massacring villagers. Tehran is playing a game of narrative warfare where the U.S. has no good options. The war, which began on February 28th, was intended by Washington to be a limited objective conflict, to degrade Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities without a full-scale invasion. The downing of this jet pushes the conflict toward the total war end of the spectrum. When personnel are captured, the mission objectives often shift from strategic degradation to personnel recovery, which requires more boots on the ground and more direct engagement. This is the creeping commitment that realist analysts fear most. What was supposed to be a surgical application of air power is now devolving into a muddy, mountainous manhunt. Iran's strategy is simple. Make the cost of American victory so high in terms of blood and prestige that Washington is forced to the negotiating table from a position of weakness. The next 48 hours will determine the trajectory of the next decade in the Middle East. If the crew is captured, the U.S. will be forced into a defensive posture, focused on negotiation and prisoner exchange. If the crew is rescued, the U.S. will likely retaliate with disproportionate force to reestablish the deterrent. However, the most likely outcome is a prolonged period of uncertainty that drains American political capital and emboldens its global rivals. The Zagros incident is the end of the clean war. We have entered the era of the grind, where the technological advantages of the West are neutralized by the geography, fanaticism, and ruthless pragmatism of the Iranian state. The myth of the untouchable sky has evaporated. This has been a special strategic report for Global Report. As the situation in the Kohgiluyeh and Boyer-Ahmad province develops, the world holds its breath. The mission has changed, the stakes have risen, and the margin for error has vanished. We will continue to monitor the movements of CENTCOM and the IRGC as this crisis unfolds. Stay informed, stay vigilant.